part is that when Florida shows up in the news during an election, it is always bad. Florida cannot get their act together when it comes to elections. It's something about being able to count. They just can't do it. But always, historically, Florida elections do not mix well. Most famously, it happened when I was about your age. 20 years ago, we had the closest election in American history between Al Gore and George Bush. And it came down to a single state. Florida was the only state that would decide the election. They were completely tied. Florida would give one the win. And Florida screwed it up and couldn't figure out what they were doing. They actually had the vote so close that Florida had to have a recount. Notice there's only 6,000 votes separating each of them right there. They had to go back, they had to recount them. They had to recount them, they got it wrong, so they had to recount a second time where they recounted by hand. This is not a joke picture. They really looked at each and every ballot to make sure that they marked the proper, like staring at the punch card, wondering, did we get this right? So Florida since then has always been kind of the butt of the joke. Why can't you count properly in Florida? I'm sure this won't happen again. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Florida had two big elections last week, too. They had the senator and they had the governor race. And we knew this was going to be a big deal here in Florida. So what happened? Surely it wasn't that close, right? Oh yeah, it was. Because it all came down to about, 15,000 votes out of 8 million cast. That is extremely narrow margin. The Republican here just barely won. And we want to look at the governor of Florida. I think this one was close too, because it absolutely was. This time only 40,000 out of 4 million votes. It's a fraction of a percent. That's how close these votes were. And they're so close that we can't actually say who won yet, because we're not finished counting them. There are some still ballots in Florida. Remember, that was a week ago that the election happened. Some ballots still uncounted. How many?
A lot.
A lot? I mean, they've been counting these. Everyone else had this figured out on election day. They've had 7 extra days, so surely they're almost there. Oh my God, 700,000 ballots still to count. What is Florida's problem? So now, the reason we're talking about this is because Donald Trump tweeted about it yesterday. This is an important tweet for us to read, so I want you to go through it right now so we can explain what's happening. Basically, he's saying Scott and DeSantis are the Republicans who are slightly ahead right now in the election, but this tweet is really important. So I want you to read the whole thing. The reason this tweet is so important is because there are many things wrong with it that are just simply not true, to the point where I actually have to take it one by one and explain to you why you can't believe any of this. So let's go one at a time with this first statement. He says, many new ballots showed up out of nowhere. That's not a thing. There actually are ballots still showing up. Those are really things that happen. They're not out of nowhere. We have a name for them. They're called absentee ballots. You're allowed to send ballots in late if you are overseas. You're allowed to mail them in. This is a normal thing that happens in every state. They're not coming out of nowhere. And most of those are coming from U.S. soldiers who are deployed in Afghanistan or Iraq or at the U.S.-Mexico border for some reason. They're allowed to mail those back. That's fine. That's normal. So that's not a thing that we have to freak out about. The second thing he says is that the vote count can no longer be honest because the ballots are massively infected. And it is important to realize that no one besides the president is saying this is true. 2 groups have already said the election is totally fair in Florida. That is the FEC, who is in charge of the actual election, and that's the Florida Police Department, who have said those are fine, there's no problems. We don't know where the president is getting this information from. So the vote is honest, we just haven't counted all the ballots yet. It's worth noting that voter fraud is this thing that sometimes gets talked about, like what is the chance of someone cheating an election? The election's so close. I mean, any one little bit could tip it one way or another. And it turns out that actually in America, we only have 2,000 cases of voter fraud in the last 20 years. Now 2,000 may seem like a big number, but how many voters are in America? Do you know? How many registered voters exist in this country? There are 150 million voters. So 2,000 is literally nothing. It is this fraction of a percent that is possible election fraud. We have never had an election that close ever before. Even if all 2,000 votes were for the same exact candidate, it wouldn't matter. Voter fraud's not a big deal. It really isn't in this country. We're very careful about how we select our votes. So the last piece of Trump's tweet is this right here. This is by far the weirdest part of it, where he says, must go with election night. That's not how this works. You don't get to pick when we stop counting the ballots. In America, all of the ballots count, even if it takes a while to count them. And the law in Florida is very specific. If it's within a 0.5%, and both of those races were, then it triggers a Florida recount. The entire state has to recount all of the ballots to make sure the correct person won. Now, Donald Trump is nervous because the Republicans might lose here, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the Republicans win or lose. You have to count all the ballots. It's the actual law in Florida to do this. And because it's so close, it means they must do a hand recount, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be staring at ballots again in Florida. How exciting is that? All right, go see that excited. Let's move on. Next story, this is the really big one, is about Trump and what's called the Russia scandal. We've not talked about this much this semester. Let me give you the really broad strokes on this, which is that Donald Trump may, his campaign, not him, his campaign may have worked with the Russian government to help him get elected back in 2016. If that is true, that is illegal. That is a felony for everyone involved. People can go to jail for this. Maybe Donald Trump, he may not have done it, but people in his campaign might have worked with Russia. That is a huge no-no. You're not allowed to work with other countries in getting a candidate elected. Now, this has been going on for 2 years. We've had this special prosecutor named Mueller who's investigating the whole thing. He's trying to find out if any wrongdoing happened. He has the power to put people in prison, and he may be announcing things in the next couple of weeks. So this is a really big story that's about to break that hasn't happened yet. Now this is a little confusing, but stay with me, okay? Right now, the guy in charge of him is the Attorney General. This is the guy in charge of the entire Justice Department for all of America. He looks like a Keebler elf, but his name is Jeff Sessions. And the important thing to know here is that this is how the hierarchy works, okay? The prosecutor, the guy investigating Trump, basically his boss is the Deputy AG, the Deputy Attorney General. His boss is the Attorney General, and his boss is the President. And that's it. These are the guys in charge of the investigation. What happens if you have more than one Attorney General? What's the plural, you know? You can't call it attorneys. It's Attorneys General, ladies and gentlemen. How fancy is that? Attorneys General? No? Don't care? All right, forget it. So, here's the reason this matters. Trump has been upset at his Attorney General for a long time. He says, Jeff Sessions should stop this witch hunt. These are all people out to get me. They're not being fair. And this has been going on for months. But last week, right after we left, like Wednesday, you guys went home, this all started, that moment was that the Attorney General of the United States resigned from his post. He basically quit his job on Wednesday, and this is a very big deal. Now, this is a letter he sent for his resignation, and I want you to read just the first line. Can you read? Is it big enough? Because what he says is, Mr. President, at your request, I am submitting my resignation. This is important because when you say at your request, that means it wasn't his idea. This is not a resignation. He's been fired by the President of the United States. So the guy in charge of the investigation of Donald Trump has been fired by the President. This is a really big deal. Now this means with this guy out of the way, who's now in charge of the special investigation? You know? What do you think?
Either the deputy until another attorney general is appointed.
See, that would be the correct answer. It should be this guy, right? But it isn't, because on the same day that Trump fired the Attorney General, he appointed a new acting Attorney General, this man right here, Matthew Whitaker. And if you're wondering, who is this guy, that's what everybody else was saying too, because no one knows this guy. He's not an appointed official who works for the government. He's not a famous lawyer. He's famous really for one thing, which is an article he wrote last year. And the article he wrote last year had this title. Trump has hired someone who essentially wants to stop the investigation, who's now in charge of the investigation. This is a really big deal. Can the President of the United States essentially stop an investigation of himself? Because that is what appears to be happening this week as we are talking. This has only ever happened one other time where an Attorney General has been fired by the President under investigation. Anyone know which President? When it happened?
Was it Clinton?
It wasn't Clinton. Only other person to ever do this was Richard Nixon during Watergate, right before he was impeached. So we live in interesting times, ladies and gentlemen. Like, things are happening. Now, the only other thing Whitaker's famous for, he's this guy right here, is that he's also in charge of a group called World Patent Marketing, a company which is currently under investigation by the FBI for possible fraud. Now, when he becomes Attorney General, which happened last week, he's now in charge of the FBI, who's investigating him for crimes. That is a real thing that's happening, ladies and gentlemen. It is insane. It is crazy, the times that we live in right now. Now, there were massive protests last week all across the country. There are 1,000 cities that held protests. This is New York City in Times Square. This is Chicago right here. I had to blur out some of the profanity on the signs right there, but you can see that people are pretty upset about what is going on. There was also this photo taken during the protest in Chicago, which appears to have a giant inflatable angry baby Donald Trump, which is by itself, I think, worth noting, but we need to move on, all right? So, all of this happened last week, and on top of that, on the same day all those things happened, we had this final story I want to talk to you about, which is about a reporter named Jim Acosta. Acosta works for CNN, and Donald Trump held a press conference about this whole Attorney General thing last Wednesday. During the press conference, something weird happened, and I want to show it to you rather than tell you about it, all right? So he's going to be asking Donald Trump questions. Let's take a look. Here's the press conference. Normally they're pretty boring, tame affairs. The ones Trump has aren't quite the same. Take a look.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to challenge you on one of the statements that you made in the tail end of the campaign in midterms. That
Here we go.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr.
I
President,
consider it to be an
as you know,
invasion.
Mr. President, caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me
And
that.
why did you characterize it as such?
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in this election
No,
to try
I
to
want
keep
them. I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in through a process. I want it to be a process, and I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your
You know,
campaign-
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
Your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and
Well,
so
that's
on.
true.
But
They weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing
They
that.
weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. These were people. This was an actual. You know, it happened a few days ago, and
They're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of
you know
miles
what?
away. That's
I
not
think
an
you should-
invasion.
honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN,
All right.
and if you did it well, your ratings
Let
would
me
be
ask,
much
if
better.
I may ask
That's
one other
enough.
question, Mr. President, if I may ask
Peter,
one
go
other
ahead.
question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's
Mr.
enough.
President,
That's
I was going to
enough.
ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse me.
President,
That's enough.
Mr. President, one of the
Peter,
questions,
let's
if
go.
I may ask, on the Russia investigation, are you concerned that you may have
I'm not concerned
indictments-
about anything with
you
the
may have
Russian
indictments coming
investigation because it's a hoax.
Are you-
That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this? Mr. President,
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
I think that's unfair.
You're a very rude person. The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible.
Mr. President, you repeatedly, over the course
Okay,
of
just sit down, please. Well, when you report fake news, when you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
Okay, so just your normal press conference, right? So, alright, so I didn't get to the weirdest part of that press conference. So the weirdest part is not what you just saw, which is crazy. It's that after this happened, the reporter there, Jim Acosta, had his press pass suspended. He was essentially kicked out of the White House for assaulting a White House intern. And it happened in that clip. Did you see it?
Yeah.
So we're going to watch it from a different point of view as well. Suffice to say, CNN and the reporter were pretty surprised. But let's take a look. Here's the other clip I'm going to show you. This comes from the Jimmy Kimmel show, but it was I got that.
Come seek the Royal Caribbean.
Trump held a press conference yesterday. A lot of people saw this. He got in a heated back and forth with Jim Acosta of CNN, and that spat cost Jim Acosta his press pass. For real, he's not allowed in the White House anymore. Not only did they suspend his credential, they claim Acosta accosted a female intern while she was trying to take the microphone from him. This is the alleged incident from yesterday.
May I ask
You
one
don't
other
go
question? Are you worried?
That's enough, that's
Mr.
enough.
President, I
That's
was going to
enough.
ask one of the other folks. that
That's
had-
enough.
Pardon me, ma'am, Mr.
Excuse me,
President.
that's enough.
Okay, not only didn't he accost her, he said, "Pardon me, ma'am." Well, that's where the Hucka BS machine comes in. Sarah Huckabee Sanders she tweeted a doctored video clip that they believe is from InfoWars, which is a website for the mentally unbalanced, in which they sped up Jim Acosta's hand movement to make it look more violent. And the part where he says, "Pardon me, ma'am," they cut the audio out. They altered this video, and we'll take a look here. And you see, like, it sped up his hand. And the White House press secretary tweeted this video. She wrote, "President Trump believes in a free press and expects and welcomes tough questions of him and his administration. We will, however, never tolerate a reporter placing his hands on a young woman just trying to do her job."
Okay, so there's a lot there for us to talk about. The big idea, I guess, is that the White House released essentially a doctored video. They showed, not the actual video of what happened, but like showed him moving his hand faster, so he's like karate chopping the intern or whatever. And there's a lot there. I mean, certainly, like, why is the White House showing doctored videos in the first place? Is that really assault, what we just saw happen? Those are all really big questions. And after all, everyone, like, while this whole debate is going on, someone mentioned the fact that when they refer to the young woman who's just a White House intern, that's incorrect too. That woman that you saw is not a White House intern. It turns out that the woman right here who was trying to take the microphone away from him was the deputy press secretary, and she makes $130,000 a year. She's not an unpaid intern, she works for the White House. So there's just like a whole lot of misinformation happening in the middle of this, and a lot of people wonder, like, what's gonna happen? Will he get his press pass back? Are we gonna start banning reporters who ask tough questions? I understand that maybe he probably should have given the microphone back. It certainly seems to me like that was rude, absolutely. But you cannot essentially fire a reporter for doing that. They're protected by the First Amendment. You have the right to question the president, even if he doesn't like the questions. That's the way the First Amendment works. Now, as a result, CNN, as of yesterday, is suing the White House and Donald Trump, essentially under First Amendment violations, saying you cannot do that. And because of that, that brings the total number of lawsuits against the president to 13, ladies and gentlemen. 13 current lawsuits against the president, an unheard of number for any American president. I just Googled Trump lawsuits. These are all different lawsuits, all of them except for the two here, which are both the same porn star. So we are living in really unusual times, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But here we are. I guess we'll cover this as the weeks continue, all right? All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's current events. But quick reminder.